There's this idea, and it's a very commonplace one, almost deceptively simple, that if someone cares about you, they'll constantly shower you with affection. They'll always respond, always validate, always be present. But reality is far more complex, and the human psyche, even more so. So let's talk about something that seems paradoxical on the surface, but is deeply rooted in emotional dynamics. When she ignores you, that might just be a sign that she cares. Now, I'm not saying this to justify poor communication, nor am I romanticizing emotional games. What I'm saying is this: in the architecture of emotional development, when someone withdraws, it can be a reaction to overwhelming emotion, not a lack of it. Attention is not trivial. It is the most valuable currency in human interaction, especially in emotional relationships. Where we place our attention, we place our soul. The human nervous system, evolved over millions of years, is designed to prioritize what matters most to our survival, and that includes emotional bonds. If someone ignores you, they are not detached from you, they are entangled with you in a way that may overwhelm their capacity to process. Emotional investment distorts perception, and the brain reacts with self-preservation when it cannot make sense of emotional risk. Ignoring someone can be a desperate act of emotional regulation. When caring becomes chaotic, silence becomes a shield. The withdrawal of presence is often the product of emotional confusion, not a lack of feeling. In fact, the more intense the emotion, the more likely one is to suppress its outward expression. Caring deeply is dangerous. It opens you up to loss, to rejection, to the unbearable burden of vulnerability. And so, some people choose the illusion of detachment to protect what they feel the most. Emotions are not linear. They are biochemical storms that hijack the rational mind. When someone ignores you, their mind may be locked in a conflict between desire and fear. They think about you, but they can't control how much. They feel pulled toward you, but they fear losing themselves in the process. This internal dissonance creates a psychological freeze response, a paralysis of expression. Their silence is loud with emotion. It is not nothing, it is everything unspoken. Attention is a mirror of value. We pay attention to what we value most, and sometimes that value becomes too high to handle. Ignoring someone is often a clumsy, subconscious way of trying to reduce the emotional cost of caring. The mind attempts to downregulate the obsession, the craving, the dependency that comes with profound attachment. But ironically, the act of ignoring only deepens the emotional thread. You cannot ignore what you do not feel. Human connection is dangerous because it requires the surrender of ego. To truly care for someone is to accept that they hold power over your emotional state. And some people aren't ready to give that power away, even to someone they deeply care for. So they ignore, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much. They create space not to erase you, but to survive you, to emotionally digest what being close to you would mean for their identity, their safety, their internal world. Ignoring is not always about absence. It's about presence in disguise. The mind avoids what it cannot resolve. And when someone cannot resolve their feelings for you, when the feelings are too big, too raw, too complex, they retreat into silence as a temporary strategy of emotional survival. That retreat is not rejection. It is a pause between heartbeats, a tremor between longing and fear. People do not withdraw from what they don't care about. They withdraw from what destabilizes their emotional equilibrium. When you ignore something, it still lives inside you. In fact, the act of ignoring often increases internal preoccupation. The more you try to suppress a thought, the stronger it rebounds. This is the psychology of resistance. And when someone is resisting you with silence, they are likely battling an emotional intensity they haven't yet learned how to navigate. The brain seeks equilibrium, but the heart seeks connection. And when those two desires conflict, people become silent, not out of apathy, but out of emotional overload. The silence becomes a symptom of caring too intensely. It is a way to restore internal order when external connection feels too consuming. Emotional suppression is often a sign of emotional excess, not absence. When someone ignores you, they may be struggling with the implications of how much they care, because real connection requires exposure. It requires letting someone into the softest parts of you, the places where logic breaks down and vulnerability reigns. And for many, that is terrifying. Ignoring you becomes their method of maintaining control over a storm they don't want to admit is already brewing inside them. Emotion distorts time. A moment of silence from someone you care about can feel like an eternity because you feel their absence more than their presence. That's the paradox. Emotional connection makes absence louder. It's not that they've left your mind, it's that they've taken over it. And when they ignore you, it's not because you're unimportant. It's because you're significant enough to threaten their psychological balance. The avoidance of expression is often the clearest expression. People fear exposure because exposure invites judgment. Caring deeply leaves a person emotionally naked, and some would rather hide in the fortress of silence than stand in the light of potential rejection. Ignoring becomes a wall built from fear, not because love isn't there, but because love is too raw, too real, too close to the core. You must understand that the emotional mind does not operate on the same principles as the rational mind. The emotional mind hides when it should speak. It withdraws when it wants to approach. It sabotages when it craves safety. This is not logical, but it is deeply human. And if she ignores you, it may mean her emotional system is overwhelmed by the risk you represent. You matter, and that's the problem. The irony of emotional defense is that the more you care, the more you protect. And protection can sometimes look like pushing away. But you only push away what you fear will pull you in too deeply. The human mind resists the very things it desires most when it is unsure whether it can survive their loss. And so, emotional connection gets hidden under the mask of indifference. When someone ignores you, it's often the result of an unconscious test. Do I feel safe here? Can I be seen and not destroyed? Silence is not emptiness. It is an interrogation of your emotional impact on them. Ignoring is the language of those who haven't yet learned to speak the dialect of vulnerability. And attention is the truest measure of care. And sometimes the lack of outward attention is a sign of inner turbulence. If she didn't care, there would be no struggle. If you didn't matter, there would be no reaction. But there is. You become the storm she's trying to quiet without letting it consume her. Ignore the myth that all care looks like presence. Sometimes care looks like confusion. Sometimes love wears the mask of silence until it feels safe enough to speak. And when that happens, if it happens, it's not because the care began then. It's because the care finally found the courage to step into the light. Human communication is not simply about words exchanged. It is the battlefield where chaos and order constantly collide. Every relationship is a structure built between two psychological worlds, and every act of communication is an attempt to bridge that unknown with clarity. But when emotions are high, the bridge collapses. Silence enters not as an absence of feeling, but as the loudest signal that order has been lost. Chaos, in its essence, is the unknown. It is everything we cannot control, everything that exists outside our structured comprehension. When someone ignores you, they are often not moving away from you as a person, but from the unpredictable emotional reality you've created in their internal world. They are retreating from the chaos you represent to them, not because you are bad, but because the feelings surrounding you are vast, unresolved, and destabilized. People do not seek distance unless they are already emotionally entangled. The more deeply someone is emotionally impacted, the more likely they are to pull away when they feel that impact threatens to dismantle their inner structure. Ignoring you becomes the mechanism of self-preservation against a wave of disorder they were not ready for. When she becomes silent, it is not apathy. It is emotional overload translated into withdrawal. In a psychologically balanced state, people speak, they share, they listen. But when the emotional state becomes unbalanced, when the pressure of care outweighs the stability of the self, communication collapses under the weight of uncertainty. And when that collapse occurs, what emerges is not clarity, but avoidance. Avoidance of conversation, avoidance of presence, avoidance of the self. The feminine, symbolically and psychologically, is often associated with chaos, not in a negative sense, but in the sense of being the wellspring of potential. Emotion, intuition, feeling, all these aspects lie in that domain. And when those forces become turbulent, they spill over into silence. Ignoring someone becomes the act of shielding the self from emotional exposure. not because the emotion is gone, but because it is too alive, too wild, too unprocessed to be safely expressed. Ignoring is not indifference. It is the mind's attempt to reclaim territory over what feels emotionally lawless. People don't go silent to forget. They go silent to stabilize, to make sense of what is currently too emotionally volatile to name. Because to speak truthfully when the heart is overwhelmed is to risk breaking open. And so silence becomes a defense, a strategy, a temporary architecture of control in the face of overwhelming inner chaos. When someone ignores you, they are communicating in a primitive language of fear, longing, doubt, and restraint. That silence is not the opposite of care. It is care without control. It is affection without anchoring. It is the storm before the words. Because where there is no chaos, there is no need for silence. The presence of silence always signals the presence of something too emotionally charged to articulate. The breakdown of communication is never just about what was said. It is about the invisible emotional landscape behind the words. She may not be able to articulate what she feels because her internal world is moving faster than her logic can process. You don't go silent unless what you feel is stronger than what you can manage. The person who ignores you is often the one who thinks of you obsessively, but cannot find a safe psychological framework within which to interact with you. People imagine communication as a linear, clean process. In reality, it's chaotic, unpredictable, filled with emotional landmines, personal projections, and unhealed wounds. If she pulls back, if she stops speaking, if she withholds her attention, it could mean that you've triggered a part of her she doesn't yet understand. And people cannot speak about what they do not yet comprehend within themselves. So they shut down, not out of malice, but out of emotional immaturity. Chaos is frightening because it asks us to surrender control. It confronts us with everything we've been avoiding. And the more someone matters to you, the more chaos they can bring. She ignores you not because you are meaningless, but because you have the potential to undo her carefully constructed emotional defenses. You represent the unpredictable, the unspoken, the unknown, and in that space she seeks silence as a shield against vulnerability. The feminine energy, especially in the psychological realm, is not passive, it is storm-like. When it loves deeply. When it fears, it withdraws completely. So when she ignores you, she may not be stepping away from connection. She may be creating distance to protect her identity from being swallowed by emotional disorder. The stronger the emotion, the more powerful the chaos. The more powerful the chaos, the more instinctive the retreat. People don't stop speaking because they don't want to. They stop speaking because they don't know how to continue without unraveling. She may be protecting the last bit of internal order she has left. That moment of silence is her reassembling her world, not walking away from you, but trying to figure out how to face you without losing herself. Most people were never taught how to handle emotional chaos. They were taught to suppress it, to hide it, to run from it. So when they encounter someone who stirs that chaos, they panic. They go quiet, they disappear, not because they're empty, but because they're full of emotion, full of uncertainty, full of thoughts they can't yet translate into coherent communication. You must understand this. The deeper the emotional reservoir, the more violent the silence. She is not a void, she is a storm held in restraint. And silence is how she keeps that storm from breaking loose before she's ready to understand what it means. Ignoring you is not erasing you, it's bracing for the impact of caring about you. It is the pause before the emotional architecture either collapses or evolves. Real communication requires bravery. It demands that a person expose what they've been conditioned to protect. And when someone is not ready to confront the chaos of their feelings, they will avoid the conversation. They will look away from the very person who has triggered that transformation. She is not ignoring you because she has moved on. She is ignoring you because she's still stuck inside what you moved within her. The paradox is that silence can be the greatest indicator of internal noise. That which we cannot face, we avoid. That which we cannot resolve, we delay. The moment you triggered emotional movement inside her, you also awakened her fear of losing control. And fear, when intense enough, almost always leads to stillness. Not because there's nothing to say, but because there's too much that hasn't yet been sorted. So don't confuse her silence for dismissal. Don't mistake her withdrawal for indifference. She is not rejecting you. She is trying to restore order before the weight of her emotions crushes the fragile parts of her identity she has spent a lifetime building. And until she does, chaos will speak louder than any words she could offer. And so, if she ignores you, don't rush to bitterness, don't fall into ego, and don't confuse silence for apathy. Human emotion is not binary, and communication is not always direct. We are not logical creatures playing tidy games of affection. We are chaotic, vulnerable, deeply wired beings trying to find safety in a world that constantly threatens to unravel us from the inside out. Her silence may be the space between the noise and the truth. Her withdrawal might be the only language she knows when caring becomes too overwhelming to carry. She may be hiding not because she doesn't feel, but because she feels too much, too deeply, too fast. And what you interpret as rejection may in fact be her unconscious effort to process the chaos you've stirred within her. You must understand, silence is not always a wall. Sometimes it's a bridge being built quietly beneath the surface. Sometimes it's the soul trying to reestablish order before it dares to step into the vulnerability of connection again. So stand still, observe without judgment, listen to what is not said, because if you learn to see past the silence, you may just find that the care was never gone, it was just waiting for the strength to become visible. And in that understanding, you become something rare. Not just someone who is cared for, but someone who knows how to truly hold the weight of being cared about.